Good to have all of you here tonight. I hope all of you read the announcements. And if you didn't, you can catch up on the break. All right? Before we begin tonight, actually we're beginning, but before we start talking about David, I felt we had to talk about. A lot of people thinks that David was an enigma. He was very puzzling. When you really study the life of David and know how God deals with us, he was not as puzzling as you think, because we all, from time to time, fall on our face. God is doing a work. Last week, and the week before, we were talking about the good things about David. But we're going to start showing some of the bad things. And this is the reason I wanted to talk about, I wanted to introduce the class in a way that I feel you might understand David a little bit more. We are body, soul, and spirit, and all of you know that, don't you? God is He has given us new life when He clothed the Spirit with His own righteousness. We could communicate with God. Until He saved us, we could not communicate with God. He saved us from the penalty of sin. Salvation that we did not earn. Now, the soul is another thing to think about, because the soul is a part of us that is carnal. It's our desires. It's something that we inherited from our father Adam, and God starts working on us to save us from the practice of sin. And that's a lifetime, this is a lifetime deal. It's a lifetime process in our lives to save us from the practice of sin. This is what was going on with David. All right? Now, the body, of course, it will be saved when we go to be with the Lord. We'll be saved from the very presence of sin, either in the rapture or when we die and go to be with the Lord. Now, the spirit that has communication with God has to break through the soul like a nut on the inside. We didn't have a picture of a walnut, so Sharon just wrote it in there. I said, give me a picture of a walnut. The meat is inside. This is the way it is with body, soul, and spirit. That this outer, the soul and the body, there has to be a breakthrough to God. This is the reason why Paul talked about the battle that he had in Romans 7. We have the same battle. David was having the same battle. All right? As I was thinking about this lesson, there were several scriptures that came to me. A seed must fall in the ground and die, otherwise it doesn't come forth in life. The alabaster box was broken over Jesus in order that the aroma, there are so many places throughout the Bible it talks about breaking. We've got to be broken to be a spiritual being. We've got that soul of ours has to be broken. And we have to decrease. Our soul has to decrease so the spirit can increase. If you remember when we talked about Gideon, they were clay jars as we are clay. We are made of clay. And they had to be broken in order that the light would come forth. A garden must have the wind blowing on it in order to release the aroma that's in the garden. The incense that was used in the tabernacle and in the temple was ingredients that were pounded together, both bitter and sweet. And they were mainly made out of gum or different things that where trees had been wounded. A picture of how in our own personal life there has to be times of wounding, there has to be times of breaking in order that, and we will read some scripture about David until you will see. The words of David has meant an awful lot to me in my own personal life. I've gotten such words as I said last week or week before last, is there not a cause, is there not a purpose? The subject of iniquity that I will talk about later on tonight when we read that chapter. When we get something that really means a lot to our own personal lives, those words kind of weave through everything that we talk about or everything that is part of life for us. And that's what it's been for me. This is the reason why I can understand David, because we're all made out of the same thing that David was made out of. The Lord said of him, he would have his sure mercies. He was a man after God's own heart. He did the will of God for his generation. Words that were not spoken of anybody else, but yet we're going to see him as a murderer. We're going to see him as an adulterer. We're going to see him disobeyed God and numbered the people. Different things that he made serious mistakes. But he had a heart for God. And he was working on his spiritual being. Another thing is, we must die to live. The Bible says we've got to crucify the flesh. We've got to put away the old man and put on the new. We've got to bury the old man. It takes time. We've got to humble ourselves before God. We've got to decrease. We've got to give our life to save our life. God's way is a narrow way because the broad way leads to destruction. These are some of the words, just a few of the words that the Lord tells us about the change that must come to our life, like there had to be changes that came to David's life as well. He was quick to acknowledge the things that were wrong in his life and repent before God. And I want to show you what God is working on to make us a spiritual being where the soul is smaller and the spirit is larger and life comes forth. All right? The nut has to be cracked. But then when the seed goes into the ground, it brings forth life. Now, how does this all come about? It comes about through worship, that is getting to be a spiritual being, intercessory prayer, communion with God, and through getting into the Word, putting the Word in our heart that we would not sin against Him. At the table today at lunch, they were talking about somebody that, I don't know if the person had come to church here or somebody that the people knew real well at the table, that had gone into complete error. How does that happen? Because they have not hidden the Word in their heart. They have not communed with God in a way that that would bring life, that would that would really mature the spirit so that we become a spiritual being. Worship is so important. The thing that, when I came to this church over 50 years ago, or to the old church, Bethesda, over 50 years ago, and I was a young person in my early 20s, but I had been running for God for a few years. I cried for weeks and months in the services because of the worship. I had never been in a church, and I was raised in church, between the Baptists and the Pentecostals. Once a month at Pentecostal, and 3 weeks out of the month I was in a Baptist church. So I'm a mixture, good mixture, I think, good balance. Anyhow, I'd been running from God because I felt the call of God on my life when I was 12 years old. And it was difficult for me to say yes to God. The world looked better than the church in those days. Very few young people were in the services. And God brought me to this church, and I thought I was in heaven almost. The atmosphere was charged. I have seen Pastor Beal, as he led the worship, he would just start to sing choruses, just composing choruses. I didn't know anybody. Somebody brought me here. I'd just come back to the Lord that just brought me here and left me. Because she was one of these people that just went from church to church. And I stayed. But it was an atmosphere that really kept me here all of those years. I mean, I was bound here. There was such a presence of God. There is a danger after a while of not realizing what is true worship. What is true worship? It's something that changes your life. It's something that you're caught up out of the things that you're going through because you feel the presence of God. We want to make sure. We want to make sure that we know that we're finding in our own personal life a place where we're in the presence of God, where we're building ourselves up. I get in my car. I have worship music and hymns on CDs in my car every time I start the motor. And it builds me up. And there have been times when I was on trips that I was so caught up in the music. And it is the music. We come into His presence with singing. The music is so important that I have even missed where I was supposed to turn on a highway and had to go back 10 miles. But that was all right because I felt the presence of God. You see, when David had the kind of music that drove the devil away, there's a kind of music that drives the devil away, builds you up, and there's a kind of music that is carnal that the devil loves. Modern rock, church rock, I know they have a message that this generation is after, but maybe I'm too old, I don't know, but the beat sometimes bothers me. I see them on TV sometimes that I turn it off very quickly. I mean, it's supposed to be Christian rock. This is a kind of beat sorry to say it, it was a kind of beat that the ancient world, the idolaters had that drew Israel. They had more than a statue out there, of an idol. They had music. They had all kinds of things that would draw the people, where Israel could only go 3 times a year to the temple. They were told they had to go 3 times a year. Now, what am I saying? Make sure that in your personal life that you're surrounded by something that builds you up, that brings the presence of God. You remember David played the harp. There's no sweeter music on earth than the harp. It drove the devil away. David Brainerd is one of my favorite church history people. He was a young man that was in training to be a lawyer and almost finished. He was a sick man, though, but he had such a burden for the American Indians. So he would travel from one state to another on horseback in the wintertime. Sometimes he would even fall off his horse, and he wouldn't even have the strength to get up out of the snow. He slept in barns, had very little success, but he had a dying vision to minister to the American Indians. He'd go from one reservation to another. And finally, before he died, he had a breakthrough. All night long, he went to this reservation, and all night long he could hear this music, these drums, beating real loud, devil-type music. And I'm not putting the drums down. My son's a drummer. Okay? Because I love all kinds of music, but I have a difficult time with Christian rock, to tell you the truth. But anyhow, he went out, listened to these devilish drum beats all night long from drunkards. And he went out to preach, and he had a drunkard that was interpreting what he had to say. And all of a sudden, these Indian people fell on their face, weeping. They heard what he said. The presence of God came in just from his voice speaking to them. And he had a revival among the Indians before he died when he was 31, 32 years old. But he did the will of God for his generation, like David. Fanny Crosby, blind. She wrote 8,000 hymns. We love the hymns. I guess that's a Baptist in me. I love the hymns. I love the hymns. There's such a good message, such good theology, that I hope we never forsake the hymns. Handel's Messiah is the most heavenly music I think I have ever heard. I want to tell you how it was composed. He was a composer, but I've heard the story that he was very weary, and he went to bed and he just was resting. And one day he was lying on his bed and he heard this heavenly music. It was coming out of heaven. And until he wrote that, he would not eat or sleep. He was just writing as fast as he could write. I think it's the most inspiring thing. I think, today we don't write scripture, not since the first century, the New Testament. I think it's the nearest thing to the inspiration of the Bible as anything that has ever been written in our time. This was inspired from heaven. What am I saying? I am saying that David was this kind of man, loved God. He knew how to worship. He knew how to come into the presence of God. He was the one that put music in the temple. He had thousands of Levites, singers, and musicians. And when they were building the temple and when they were repairing the temple during the time of the kings and prophets, they had music going on all the time they were doing their work to encourage and to build up the workers and to make sure that they were doing the will of God in whatever they were doing. We need to be feeding our spirit. This is what I'm saying. This is what David did. But he catered from time to time to the fleshly appetite, to the carnal spirit. But he had built himself up so much. I have thought about him, and I thought, I've taught the life of David for years, and I thought, who is this man? I mean, what secret did he know? He knew the secret of the presence of God. He knew the secret of worship. He knew the secret of communion with God. And once in a while he would stray, but he would come right back until God said, he did all of my will. He will have my mercies. We will talk about that later too. But I felt that I need to talk about that so you would understand David a little bit more. And so that we would know that, God is working on us the same way he did David. And we make our mistakes too. But be sure that you are feeding your spirit. That you're just not entertaining the flesh. But that you are communing with God. You're bringing the presence of God into your spirit, building yourself up. All right? Let's talk about David. His wanderings. This was the 12, 13 years possibly that he is running from Saul, all these different places that he went. This was necessary in David's life because he was going to be king. And Lord willing, and if we have time, and I think we will have time, the last week I'm going to show you a video of the 3 kings of Israel that I think you will appreciate seeing. That will show you a few of these places. So, he even went to the Philistine country. This is a city that the Philistines gave him for his 600 men and their families to live in. And we're going to study about a place where he went that his own people, the Judean people, even betrayed him to Saul. He went all the way down to the wilderness of Paran as well. And he was getting rid of the enemies of God. And the Philistines thought that he was getting rid of his own people and how God covered him. And these are places, and we'll talk about this is a wilderness. We were hoping that we would put what a wilderness looked like. It was not a wilderness like we know today, have all kinds of trees. It was a barren land. It was limestone mountains. It had caves. This is where David was hiding. In fact, when you go to Israel, in the last 60 years or more, is the first time they have had trees for years and years and years before that. During the time when the Jews were away from Israel, it was barren. It was a wasteland. And you'll be amazed when you go in, especially in the Galilee area, and see how green it is. And every tree was planted. So wish all of you could go when we go in March. And if you're interested, you really need to see me because you have to have your money in by the first part of January. Several people in here are going. Okay, let's look at David in the wilderness of Ziph that we just looked at. He and his army of 600 people departed and went to the strongholds of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul heard that he had escaped and sought him daily. David knew that Saul was after him, but Jonathan went to him to encourage him in the Lord and to tell him that he was with him in spirit. He would protect him in every way he could, and to encourage him in the Lord. And again, the two of them made a covenant together. The Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah and told him where David was hiding. And they said, "We will deliver him to you." And Saul told them to go ahead, and he would come. So Saul went after David. Saul came to the side of the mountain where David was hiding, and David made haste to move, fearing Saul. When Saul compassed David and his men round about, a messenger came and told him the Philistines were attacking some part of the kingdom, and so he returned back to his home. David moved to En-Gedi. And when we go to Israel, we go to En-Gedi. We wanted to find a picture of, and you that went last year, you remember En-Gedi was down by the Dead Sea where we took a picture of the goats, the mountain goats. And they stayed there for some time at En-Gedi, and a lot of them took pictures of. This is where David spares Saul's life. He was told that David was hiding at the wilderness of En-Gedi, and he took 3,000 men to take David and bring him back. Saul went into a cave where David and his men were in order to rest. David's men reminded him that God had given promise that David's enemies would be delivered to him, and they encouraged him to kill Saul. But there is no way that David would touch God's anointed. He looked at Saul. He loved Saul, and he looked to him almost as a father. But David had the insight. He knew that you could not kill somebody that God had anointed. And this is the reason why that I feel that possibly Saul repented, and we will probably see him in heaven, because David looked at him as God's anointed, even up until his death. He cut Saul's robe, so Saul would know that he had saved his life. And David said to his men, "God forbid that I do harm to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth my hand against him." He stopped his men from harming Saul. When David left the cave, he cried out to Saul to let him know that he had cut his robe, that he was right beside of him, but yet he would not kill him. "I spared your life," David said. And he promised, I will not put my hand against you. And I have no evil intent toward you. Yet you hunt my soul to take it, he said. The Lord judged between us. So Saul came out and said, "Is this my son David that is talking?" He lifted up his voice and began to weep. That is Saul. Saul also said, "You are more righteous than I. You have rewarded me good for my evil. The Lord reward you good. I know you will be the king of Israel, and the kingdom will be established in your hand. So swear that when you become king, you will not harm my family," because in ancient days, when they took over a kingdom, and they probably do it in some countries today, they would kill the whole family, so their position would not be threatened. David swore to Saul, and Saul went home. Let's turn to Psalm 54. You will see. Going to read just a few. I hope you will read the book of Psalms and that you will see the depth of David. He was a prophet. He said, Psalm 54, "Save me, O Lord, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth, for strangers are risen up against me. And oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them, Selah. Behold, God is mine helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in thy truth. I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye has seen his desire upon mine enemy." It's believed that he probably wrote that at this time. David and in Paran. This is where he met one of his wives. Samuel died at this point, and all Israel gathered to bury him, and they had a time of mourning for him. And David and his men arose and went, we intended to get in Getty picture, and we didn't do it. Sorry. Sharon has worked so hard on this lesson, and we've had all kinds of things going on, so I hope you understand. Okay, where Paran, do we have it here? Well, it's in I think it's in this area here, all right? It's down in the upper part of the Sinai Peninsula, all right? It's not over here. There was a very evil man. He was from the tribe of Caleb, of course. He was influential. He was wealthy that lived there. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, so you can imagine how wealthy he was. And David and his army went down there, and they were guarding his property. They were guarding his sheep and his herds. And it takes a lot of food for 600 plus men. And so David sent some of his men to this man to ask him. They have been guarding his sheep and his herds to keep the wild animals away and to keep the enemies away. So could you please share some bread and some water with us? And David received a message. He said, "Who is this David? Shall I take my bread, water, and flesh and give it to him?" So when David got this message, he was very angry. He girded himself with a sword and 400 men, and they were going to kill him. So his wife Abigail heard all that had happened, how David and his men had been kind only to receive such evil words. She quickly took food to them and drink to them, and she met David and his men, and she fell before David and said, let this iniquity be upon me. Do not regard this man. Folly is with him. I have stopped you from avenging yourself. This would have been murder. Now David had been killing. What is the difference in David killing the enemies of God and then killing a countryman? God evidently looked at it differently. This would have been murder. As I told you last week, in the commandments, in the 10 Commandments, it does not really say in the Hebrew, thou shalt not kill. It says, thou shalt do no murder. If God commissioned a battle or warfare, in God's sight, that was not murder. Because God had said that he's going to avenge. And he knew in order to save Israel, he must get rid of these people that's going to draw their hearts away. And they are going to serve Satan and idols rather than to serve God. And we've already seen that, and we'll continue to see it. She said, I have stopped you from avenging yourself. The Lord will make you a sure house because you have fought his battles. Evil has not been found in you. Your soul shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord. Your enemies' souls shall be slung out. When the Lord makes you king, she had insight into knowing he's going to be the next king over Israel. This shall not be grief to you, that you would shed blood without a cause. And David blessed her, and he said, you have kept me from shedding blood. When after she went back and told her husband what had happened, he had a heart attack and died. See, God avenges, doesn't he? We don't have to. But David then married Abigail. She became one of his wives. And so you're going to see, again, David's going to begin to collect wives. This is another thing. You know, and the law of Moses, they were not supposed to do this. But most of these men had more than one wife. And it almost seemed like God condoned it from some of them. And I'm surprised that David, being the man that he was, would have all of these wives and all of these children, dozens probably of children. But you can understand why he had a lot of problems. You have a lot of wives and a lot of children, you're going to have a lot of problems. And he did. I mean, everything that he did, the circumstances of his life, that we will talk about later, the Lord said, the sword's never going to leave your home. And it didn't. All the things that he did came to him almost fourfold. Okay, David in the wilderness of Ziph again. They came to Saul and told him that David was in the hills of Havilah. So Saul took again 3,000 men to seek David. Saul pitched in the hills, and David abode in the wilderness. David sent out spies and knew where Saul was. David came to Saul and found him sleeping, surrounded by his men. He stole his sword and his water bottle. And then he went and he called and he to the people who were they were sound asleep, all of them. Even the guards of Saul were asleep. And David called out and shamed, taunted the men that were supposed to be guarding. They said, boy, you're good guards. You know, I was there and I took Saul's sword and all of you were asleep. And so, but he gave his sword back. And Saul said to him again, is this your voice, David, my son? He confessed his sin again, promised not to harm David. And David asked someone to come and to get the king's spear, for he would not touch God's anointed. Saul again blessed David, told him that he would do great things and prevail. David left, and Saul returned home. David becomes a vassal of the Philistines. Let's find the Philistines over here. Philistia here, with their 5 cities, all right, bordering on Dan. They had been there for hundreds of years, and they continued to be there for a long time. David became weary and discouraged, feeling he would perish by the hand of Saul. He fled to Philistia with 600 men. He dwelt in Gath, Gath. That's Gaza. Gath is here. He dwelt in Gath and with the men and their families. They took their families with them. Saul was told, but he didn't want to seek him there because he's afraid of the Philistines. David asked the king to give them a town to dwell in, and which they did. And from that town, they invaded all the south area, all the way almost down to Egypt. They invaded, took the spoils of war, and also killed the enemies of God. This is when the Philistines thought that David was battling his own people. The Bible says they left neither man or woman. They took sheep and oxen and asses and camels and apparel and returned to the king. The Philistine king believed that he warred against his people, Israel. The Philistines gathered their armies to war against Israel, and David was told that he must go with the Philistines, for he would be the king's keeper. Now, Psalm 34 is supposed to have been written, but I'm not going to read it for lack of time, but I want to just show you some of the things that's in that psalm, and you can check it out, that David put in that psalm as principles that were very important in his life. The first one was prayer and praise. The next one was seeking God. He sought God. And he looked to God, perception. And he looked to God for protection. That was another one, protection. He talks about God protecting him. And he talks about having the fear of God in your heart. And he said, and he began to talk about what we should do. Be careful how we speak. Watch our speech. And depart from evil. These are principles that he included in Psalm 34. And read it at home. Saul consults a witch. Strange story. Samuel was dead, and Saul had rid the nation of familiar spirits, of witches and wizards and so on. The Philistines gathered and waited, ready to attack the nation of Israel. Saul recruited his army, and they camped in Gilboa, which is up in this area. They were camping up there. And Saul disguised himself in his fear and came by night to a witch's residence. He told one of his messengers, go out and see if you can find a witch, because he had thought he had destroyed most of them, and they found one. And he went in her home because he could not hear from God. He was seeking God, and God was not speaking to him. He was accustomed to Samuel guiding him. Now Samuel is dead. The woman feared, and she thought, he has come to kill me. But he assured her that she would be safe. And she saw, and he said, I want you to bring Samuel back, because I have to ask him what's going to happen. I have to ask him for guidance. I don't understand this, but I believe the Bible. When the woman saw Samuel coming out of the earth, she cried out loudly, for she realized that this was Saul. And she said she saw gods ascending out of the earth, and she saw an old man coming up, covered with a mantle. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. Saul bowed down to the ground, and Samuel asked why he had been disturbed. Why have you brought me back? He was at rest. Why have you brought me back? And he said, I've got troubles and I don't know what to do. The Philistines are attacking. God has departed. He's not speaking to me. I want to know what to do. So Samuel told him that the Lord had rent the kingdom from him, as he had prophesied before that he would do, had given it to David because he had not been obedient to the will of God. The Lord would deliver Israel to the Philistines. Next day, Saul and his sons would be killed in battle. Saul fell to the earth in great fear. He was urged to eat, but he refused to eat. Servants and the woman compelled him to be strengthened with some food. And Saul and his servants arose and left in the night. David dismissed by the Philistines. They gathered their army. Israel's men had pitched a little ways from them. The lords of the Philistines passed by in hundreds and thousands in number. David and his men were at the end of the troops. There were 400 or 600 men at the end. The princes of the Philistines asked why Hebrews were there. Why have you got the Hebrews here? There was David, servant of Saul, whom had been among them for some time. And the king said, they have caused me no trouble. And there's been no problem with them, the king answered. But the princes of the Philistines were very angry about it, and they protested. They said, these men cannot go to battle with us. So the king appealed to David not to go. I'm sure he was real happy about that. And he and his men returned to the Ziklag, a city, a village that the Philistine king had given to David to live in with their families. David went home, and his men went home in 3 days, and they had found that their families were gone. They had been the Amalekites that had been slain by Saul had regrouped. Many of them evidently had escaped. They had regrouped, and they were very vicious. They were very cruel people. And they had come when the men were gone and only the women and the children were there. And they had taken their goods, and they had taken the families prisoner. And when David's men went and found empty houses, they wanted to kill David. And David asked the high priest who was with them, Abiathar, that had been saved from Saul's massacre, to inquire of the Lord what they should do. Should they go after the families? Should they go after the Amalekites? And the Lord told them to go. On the journey, they found a young Egyptian lad that was sick that they had left behind, the Amalekites had left behind. And they gave him food and water, and he led them to the camp of the Amalekites. When they came to the camp, they found all of these enemies of God that were drinking and celebrating what they had done. They had taken great spoil from David's army, as well as the families. And David smote them for many hours. Only 400 escaped on camels. David recovered all that had been taken and rescued their families. He took their flocks. You see, he was like, we find Abraham and Isaac. No matter what they did, they came away richer. David came away richer. He took their flocks and their herds and all the spoil and divided it equally among them. There were 200 men that had stayed behind to guard the stuff. There's a principle here. This became a law in Israel. that those that stayed behind, that did not go out to war, would receive the same as those that had gone to battle. I think this is a message to us. If we support missionaries, when the rewards are handed out, we're going to have the same reward that they had that went out to battle. Isn't that a wonderful promise? It became a law in Israel, and naturally all of those things were examples to us. And so the Lord divides and gives to us if we give to others. David also sent much of the goods that he got from, I believe that I failed to put the whole outline on the screen. David also sent a lot of the goods that he had gotten to the elders of Judah, to Bethel, to Ramoth, and many other places in the kingdom. Philistines and the death of Saul. Philistines fought against Israel. The men of Israel fled, but were slain at Mount Gilboa. Philistines followed Saul and his sons and slew the 3 sons of Saul, including Jonathan. That was David's buddy. David, the one that he loved him almost more than life. And Jonathan was killed in battle along with his father. They hit Saul, and he was wounded, and he asked his bodyguard to kill him. He did not want the Philistines to torture him or to have it said that they had killed him. And the bodyguard would not kill him, so he fell on his sword and killed himself. The bodyguard did the same. The men of Israel forsook the cities when they saw the men flee, and Saul and his sons die. The Philistines stripped the dead. They found Saul and his sons. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and sent it back to the people, to their own people, to be placed in the idol temple. And they put Saul's armor in the house of Asherah and fastened his body to the wall at Beth-shan, recently covered by archaeologists in Israel. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard, the valiant men from Jabesh Gilead arose. Okay, you see where Jabesh Gilead is? Okay. This was in the northernmost part of Manasseh. These were fellow countrymen across the river Jordan. Why would they have such sympathy for Saul? It was they that went to the temple, or to the idol temple, and got Saul's and their sons' bodies and took them and buried them. Why were they so sympathetic? Why were they the first to say this was dishonoring the dead, especially Saul and his sons? So they were the ones that went, and it took courage to do it. Why? With the relationship. What is the relationship? From the book of Judges. You know that. Jabesh Gilead, you remember Jabesh Gilead was the one that Israel went and killed because they did not go against Benjamin. And then they went over and killed the men and took the virgins, and they married the Benjamites that were left. Right. Remember? Okay. Because they had sworn that their sons would not, their daughters would not marry a Benjamite, and they were trying to get wives for them. So there was a relationship between Jabesh Gilead and the Benjamites, especially Saul. So they were the ones that went to get Saul's body, and so to to take it and to bury it. This 2 Samuel 1:17 through 27, David mourns Saul's and Jonathan's death. And this is a song that was sung. Would you read that, Paul?
Then David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. And he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. Indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher. The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Let the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Let the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For the shield of the mighty is cast away there. The shield of Saul not anointed with oil, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty. The bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxury, who put adornments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I am not distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished.
Let me read one to show you the attitude of David. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives. Saul had not been lovely to David, had he? But here is such forgiveness in David for all of the wanderings and all of the things that Saul had tried to kill him. And he had had to live in caves and all kinds of places for years and years and years. But yet after he died, he wept over them. He honored Saul. And he said, he was lovely and pleasant, anything but. David crowned king. Okay. David crowned king of Judah. Saul's son crowned king of the other tribes. This, we began to see what we're going to see in the next semester of the jealousy and the not accepting David or or Jerusalem or Judah. They are going to be divided into two kingdoms. And we began to see it in the book of Judges, where there was jealousy between Ephraim and Judah. Ephraim especially, that had produced so many leaders who was of Joseph. They became very arrogant. So David inquired of the Lord and was sent up to the cities of Judah, and he brought all of his men and his families to Hebron to dwell. He's going to be in Hebron for 7.5 years as king. The men of Judah came to anoint David, just Judah, to anoint David king over Judah. He sent a message to Jabesh Gilead and congratulating them and blessing them for going to get the body of Saul and his sons from the Philistines. And it almost seemed as if he wanted to know if they're going to support him at this point. And he spoke of his anointing king and seemed to ask for their support. Abner, who was a general of Saul's army, took Saul's son Ishbosheth and made him king over the other tribes. And we, at this point, can even call the other tribes Israel, even before the kingdom split in two. He was 40 years old. His reign would last 2 years. David ruled Judah for 7.5 years. Civil war in Israel. Abner, who was Saul's general, and Joab, who was the general of David, and Joab was a cousin of David, by the way, met at Gibeah to challenge one another to see who was the strongest. And through 12 of their young men, who slew one another with the sword. There was a horrible battle in which Abner and his men were defeated. 3 of David's cousins were there, Joab among them. And they were runners, light-footed runners. Asahel pursued Abner, but was warned time and again to stop. But he pursued, and Abner smote him with the sword, who was a brother of Joab. And Joab really could carry grudges, believe me. He was unforgiving. Joab and his brother then ran after Abner until sunset, and the tribe of Benjamin gathered their armies and followed Abner and his men, and Abner and Joab called out to one another. They wanted peace. This was crazy for them to be fighting one another. Joab blew a trumpet, and his army stood still and pursued no more that day. 19 of David's men were missing, but 360 men of Benjamin were slain in that battle. Abner deserts Ishbosheth, who is the son of Saul. He is murdered by Joab. There was a long war that existed between Saul's house and the house of David. David grew stronger and stronger, and Saul's weaker and weaker. 6 sons were born to David in Hebron, and 6 wives were involved. Already he had all these wives and many more. Abner became very strong in Saul's kingdom, so he slept with one of Saul's wives. Now Saul was already dead, but this was wrong that Abner would take one of his wives or his concubines and sleep with her, and he was rebuked by the king that had been anointed, Ishbosheth. Abner was so angry that he sent messengers to David requesting a treaty. I want to meet with you so that we can make a treaty. He would work to bring all Israel into David's camp. David agreed if Abner would bring Michal back to him. She had been given away, remember? And David then sent messengers to Ishbosheth demanding Michal be sent. His request was granted. Abner met with the elders of Israel, and so they were wined and dined, and so Abner told David of his plan to bring all Israel to accept him as king over Israel, and David sent him away. But Joab had been out to war, and when he came back, he was told what had happened. And he was angry. He said Joab took him aside and killed him, that is Abner, for he still wanted to avenge his brother's death, and also his own position was threatened. If Abner came over into favor with David, he probably would not be head of his forces anymore. So he killed him. David heard about it, and he was deeply troubled, for he felt that Judah was guilty of shedding innocent blood. David never got over this. He watched Joab. We'll talk about that later. He did not trust him. He used him, but he never really forgave him, because before he died, he told his his son Solomon, there's a few things that I never took care of, and I want you to do it. And one of them was get even with Abner's death. I want you to kill Joab. This was his cousin. David commanded Joab and all the people with him to tear their garments and gird themselves with sackcloth and mourn for Abner. And he followed the coffin of Abner, who was buried in Hebron. David and the people wept at the grave, and he fasted all day, that is David. And it pleased the people that he lamented over Abner. David said that a great man had fallen in Israel. He also spoke of his own weakness before these cousins of his. Thus he said, the Lord will reward the doer of evil according to his wickedness. Ishbosheth, who is the son of Saul, is murdered. Ishbosheth and the people of Israel were troubled over Abner's death. The king had two captains who were Benjamites who went in when he was in bed, and they slew him, cut off his head, and went and traveled all night to Hebron, to where David was, thinking that David is going to reward them for bringing the head of Ishbosheth to them. They thought David would rejoice. Did he rejoice? Absolutely not. He had promised Saul that he would not harm his family. And it was not in David had no intention of harming any of Saul's family. And what did David do to these two men that brought the head of Ishbosheth? Pardon?
Took off his hand and feet. Took off the hand and feet.
A little louder.
The hand and feet. Cut off their hand and feet.
Right. Well, he killed them first.
Yeah.
Cut their hands and feet off. And and he hanged them over the pool of Hebron. And they buried the king's head. He did this as, I believe, made examples of them, that they should not do terrible things like that, especially to the household of Saul or anyone else, because he would not rejoice over any of Saul's family's deaths. David then was anointed king over Israel. All of the 12 tribes came together at Hebron to make peace and to make him king over the nation. David was then 30 years old, and he reigned 40 years. 7.5 years from Hebron and 32.5 years from Jerusalem. He and all Israel traveled to Jerusalem, inhabited by the Jebusites. Remember, this is one of the Canaanite tribes. And they took the city of David. And the Jebusites resisted, and David said, anyone who would smite them and take the city, he would make captain over his armies. And of course, Joab was right there to do it. David lived in a castle city of David and built it. He became greater and greater, for the Lord was with him. Jerusalem built by David. David's forces, led by Joab, entered Jerusalem through a water tunnel and captured the city. Jerusalem was called the City of Peace, became capital of both religion and civil government. God dwelt there. His name would dwell there. David began to build. So he hired King Hiram of the Phoenicians. They were very gifted people. The Phoenicians were the people up in, we'll show you a map in a few minutes. You remember the Phoenicians were north and the Philistines were south. And they were there all of the history of the nation of Israel. He hired him, and so did Solomon after him, to come to provide for them cedar wood. That is, Phoenicia is now Lebanon. And there is a lot that we read in history in the Bible about the cedars of Lebanon. And they would float the cedars down the Mediterranean Sea, and they would get them to build Jerusalem, and especially the temple later on. And they had carpenters and stonemasons to help them build, because the Israelites were never gifted in building. God never gifted them that way, for their tendency would be to make idols. So they usually, with some of the things that they did, they had to hire outside workers. David built a castle, and other buildings were constructed. He also made a new tabernacle. 13 sons were added to his family there. The Philistines attempt to capture David. In your book, if you're following the book, I switched around one of these categories of information, because I felt in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, it's not always strictly in chronological order. And most of the time, I caught it when I wrote the book, but there's a few times that I felt things just did not belong there, and I switched it around when I began to teach it, and this is one of the places. The Philistines attempted to capture David. A great host of Philistines heard about David's anointing as king, and they came to take him captive. David prayed, and God led him to go against the Philistines, and he defeated them. He took on more wives and concubines at this point, and other sons and daughters were born. We don't know how many sons and daughters David had. There are just a few of them that are mentioned in Scripture that gave him a lot of trouble. Solomon was the only one that didn't give him trouble, as far as I can see. And I mean, some of them wanted him dead, and they slept with his wives, and they did all kinds of things. They plotted to take the throne. You name it, they did it. They raped his daughter, and a lot of things are coming up that comes against David, where he has sinned against God. He said, my mercies will never leave, but also you're going to suffer the rod of men and of God, the stripes. The sword will never leave your home. The consequences, God didn't kill him. He could have been killed according to the law for the things that he did, but God did not allow him to die, neither Bathsheba to die. However, he's going to suffer for the things that he did, suffer through his family. Terrible, terrible things. So if the Philistines, there was a Philistine that tried to kill David, but David turned around. He destroyed Philistines from Geba to Gezer, 2 cities, all between he destroyed. Could we take, no, let's go a little farther, sorry.
You're behind one.
Okay,
Ruth,
yes,
you're behind one.
I'm behind one.
Yep. Okay, now you gotta go to the next one.
Sorry.
Here you go.
Okay. I'm glad I have Sharon in here. She prepares me, and then she tells me where to click, and then I get carried away and I forget to click. Okay. David's conquests. Would you read Psalm 20, Paul, please?
May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob defend you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and strengthen you out of Zion. May he remember all your offerings and accept your burnt sacrifice. May he grant you according to your heart's desire and fulfill all your purpose. We will rejoice in your salvation, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stand upright. Save, Lord. May the King answer us when we call.
David was victorious everywhere. He conquered Gath, which is one of the Philistine cities here. He conquered Gath and subdued the Philistines. He spoiled Moab, which was here. They paid tribute to him. He destroyed the armies of Zoab and Syria north here. He destroyed the Edomites, which were south down here, and placed garrisons throughout their land. He built garrisons in Damascus, Syria, way up here. God was with him, wasn't he? And they paid tribute to him. He became very wealthy. He amassed wealth from conquest and became famous throughout the whole world. He was feared by all of the rulers round about. David ruled, however, with justice. Even though they feared him, he ruled with justice. David sent ambassador to Ammon to express sympathy for the death of the king's father. And so they suspected his messengers of being spies. And they were treated so badly. Their robes were cut, their beards were shaven off, and David was very angry. The Ammonites recruited Syrians to fight David, but Israel under Joab defeated them. When they regrouped, David led the forces against them, and in the battle, over 40,000 of the Ammonites were slain. These numbers are absolutely mind-boggling of the people that were slain in these battles. You wonder how they got rid of all the bodies, don't you?
I know.
I know.
You really wonder. And yet we have to trust that the Bible is true, that these numbers are true. The remainder became slaves to David. But David now brings judgment upon the people, and then we're going to take a break. David numbered the people of Israel. Why was that a sin?
God didn't want
Trust in God.
trust him.
They were not to number except when God told them to number. There were only a couple of maybe 3 times in their history that they were allowed to number the people, because he did not want them to trust in horses, to chariots, or numbers of men. Why? Because God was with them and God would fight their battles. And we see when God fought for them, they won battles over and over with the loss of very few men, and the enemy, thousands of men were lost. And in opposition to what God had said, and even Joab, ambitious Joab, tried to persuade him not to number the people. And God was so angry that he sent the prophet Gad to him, saying, God will judge you. And he gave David 3 choices. There will be 7 years of famine, there would be 3 months of enemy destruction, or there would be 3 days of plague. Take your choice. David said, you judge me, don't let men judge me. So he decided that God could send plague. He confessed his sin and asked for forgiveness and mercy. He asked that God, not man, judge him, because God would be merciful, but man was not merciful. God sent the angel of the Lord with a drawn sword to destroy Jerusalem's residents by plague. David stood by a threshing floor of a Jebusite when he saw the angel. He asked, and they clothed themselves in sackcloth before God. and fell before God and asked for mercy. David said to God, "Destroy me and my household, but please do not destroy our people, the nation." Gad instructed David to build an altar, and he asked the Jebusite if he could buy the altar, the threshing floor. And the Jebusite said, "No, I'll give it to you." And he said, "I will not offer anything to God that has not cost me." This is one of the things that you see about David. He realized the importance of sacrifice. And he bought the threshing floor. He slaughtered the oxen, and he burned the threshing floor before God. Before David could, before anything could happen, even from the sacrifice that he made, 70,000 Israelites died from the plague. God commanded the angel to withdraw the sword, and the plague ceased. Okay, let's take about a 20-minute break. There's a lot of good things out there.